All right. Welcome back to another episode of the Back to Square Quant podcast. This episode is a little different. And the last time we only had the both of us was when we had episode 0. But this time we decided to take a break, or maybe we are running out of guests to interview. So if you have
Oh no.
anyone
Disaster.
to recommend, yeah, please do. Today, it's just gonna be two of us, and we're just gonna have a casual conversation on the topic of disagreement, right?
Ooh,
So,
Kedrick says casual, but I might potentially say, I might disagree with that.
or already starting with the disagreement, but yeah. So, I guess what kind of inspired us to take up this to talk about this topic is that in today's like climate, whether it's a political climate or cultural climate, there's a lot of topics that people disagree with, and disagreement that is too great usually leads to division, and division, like big division, usually isn't great for society as a whole, especially when certain groups of people are ostracized from others, and things like that. But I guess everybody would face some form of disagreement. The degree of disagreement would vary from people to people, and topics to topic, right? Some people might just disagree on what the best ice cream flavor is, right? And some people might disagree on issues of like policies and social issues, right? Just letting all of you know that ice cream flavor definitely trumps whatever social policy you can think of, right? So that is definitely the more important thing to agree on with anybody you meet. So yeah, we just wanted to jump on this episode, talk a little bit about certain disagreements and why disagreements can be productive if we approach it from the right direction.
Yeah, that's very well introduced to the topic. And I think, what one thing to say again, like, who knows, maybe by the end of the next hour or so, myself and Kedrick disagreed so much that this becomes the final episode. So you wouldn't want to miss the next couple of minutes of conversations. But I think before we even dive in, I think it's probably quite important, or at least just to sort of set the tone on what leads to disagreement. And in my mind, I think what tends to lead people to disagree with one another generally stems from a couple of places. Culturally, highly likely the way that they're being brought up. Parental influence is going to be a big one. And it does appear, at least in this day and age, like Kedrick said, this climate, a lot of disagreements can occur depending on how your social environment, or even potentially like social economics, like where are you on that social hierarchy? How would you look at certain policies, stuff like that? So a lot of disagreements, like the deeper ones at least, even the smaller ones like ice cream flavors, to be honest, might actually, in my opinion at least, do stem from that whole how you're being brought up, society, how you grew up, and stuff like that. Would you agree, Kedrick?
Yeah, I think when I guess being raised in an Asian family, we're not raised to like question authority. And I'm not saying that that is, I do think that questioning authority and respect are different, right? They are different in certain sense, because obviously you can take it too far to one end and just disrespect everybody you meet, disrespect authority and whatever, and so-called like trying to disrespect or disregard any form of authority for the sake of it, simply because they are an authority, right? Even though they're right or wrong, we just like, cool, we just want complete freedom from any form of authority, right? And we disrespect them without actually even considering it. However, I also do think that submission to authority without any thought and consideration isn't also good. So I think it does boil down towards, why do you choose to oppose something and submit to something before you decide to pick which side you are on? Giving it thought and reflection is actually the more important point.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, like, this is going to be interestingly, it actually sort of brings back memories from the podcast we did with Lauren a couple of months ago, right? We talked about being brought up as an Asian like family, and sort of like potentially the disagreements or agreements that I guess family members or kids parents would come to. And yeah, I think you're completely right. And I think respecting authority is definitely very, very important. But I also think there is also merit in trying to teach people the difference between like how to approach a how to respectfully disagree with someone, rather than just completely like blatantly like bombard them and barrage them and completely sort of dissociate them. Because like if you're not taught as a kid, or if you're not being given the skill set to distinguish or to I guess distinguish or argue, I think most people would just tend to lean to, oh, I am, my belief is this. I don't really care, what, let's say, let's say political party A, they're not really thought on how they are allowed to disagree. They basically say, no, my policy is right. This is the right way, whatever, your science is I And then we've got like the other party who's like, oh, you know what? I can see where you're coming from, but this is where we're coming from. I think where I think we could potentially learn to be better at disagreeing is probably learning from others and just being very open. What do you think, Kendrick?
Definitely, I think if we do boil it back down, right, just to draw very just to create a little bit more personal scenarios, that when we disagree with parents, right, in general, and is because I think in most cases, both parties, whether the child or the parents, they want something that's best for them, but they agree on we want what's best, right? But they disagree on how to achieve what is best. So that's where the disagreement lies. So if we can establish some form of foundation saying that, cool, we are on the same side because we want what is best, let's find a way to actually evaluate what actually is better or for the individual. Because if you can first establish that you are on the same team, it is quite likely that it will be more productive. Because if you think that this person that disagrees with me is out to like get me or out to destroy me or to put me down, right? You just basically, that's how butting heads and like huge like disagreement happens. But if huge unproductive disagreements, right? But I think for people and individuals, the big question when we kind of like reflect on why we disagree, that's really important. Like, what is causing us to disagree? Do I believe do I disagree with you because I think that what you're saying is false, or do I disagree with you because I'm trying to prop up my defenses because I feel like you are kind of attacking me, right? Because I think that if you think that what the person is saying is false, it means that there's something that is true, right? And if both parties are like, cool, you think we both agree that we want to find out what is true, right? Then we'll use different methods and approach. Maybe you see things differently, hence you come to a different conclusion on what is true. And if both parties can agree that we're trying to find out what actually is true, compared to I'm disagreeing with that person because I'm trying to attack the person, or I'm trying to be on a defensive when the person's attacking me, trying to find out what is true together would overall be more productive. So I think that should be the underlying foundation on how you can how disagreement can lead to some form of productivity in terms of facilitating discussions.
Yeah, I think that's very well put. The way I kind of take that is like, if we are disagreeing for the sake of not just protecting what we believe, I think that's probably why a lot of people tend to disagree. But if you are disagreeing for the sake of like going on the offense rather than approaching it as a really good sort of, productive disagreement, or I guess in some cases like a really good debate, especially in like the scientific community, if people are like, oh, I think a really good example is like Mike Israel, right? Team Full Rom versus Team No Full Rom. Like that's the arguments that they make are really, really good. Like they're very, very productive. They disagree, but they're very productive. But if you are someone who comes into like a disagreement with very malice and evil intent, just to sort of like, I don't really care if my point is right. What I just want to prove is that your point is wrong.
Yes.
Then I think that will start to turn, I guess, like a debate or a productive disagreement session into basically just blatantly attacking someone else. I think the worst part about that as well is it just shows, I guess, as an individual, really, is that you think you're doing enough studying on your own in order to prove that the opposition is wrong, but you're not doing enough study on your own beliefs to prove that your belief actually trumps, what the opposition believes in. And it becomes this whole like weird, like, I'm blaming you for everything and you're wrong, but it doesn't necessarily mean like where I stand is also correct. It's just that you're more wrong than I am, kind of thing.
Yeah, 100%. I do think that, like, you brought up the recent, like, the debate between Mike Sotell and Joe Steelman.
Yes, Joe Steelman, there we go.
Talking about full range of motion, partial range of motion, right, which is better for hypertrophy and things like that. The thing with that is that more often than not, it's quite like when prominent people, like, they debate one another, they're most likely not going to change their mind, right?
Exactly.
Mike's not going to change Joe's mind. Joe's not going to change Mike's mind. But the people that benefit from it are the audience or the spectators.
Exactly.
And people who shout across one another usually tend, those kind of like debates / discussions tend to be not beneficial for anybody, right? And people get really like get really upset at the end of it, right? Like, first of all, the spectators will be upset because they just wasted 2 hours listening to two grown men shout at one another, and then the two grown men are upset because they are both
they didn't win. They feel like they've lost.
Yeah, neither of them can
get
their point across, and they most likely end up with a sore throat or something like that. So at the end of the day, like, if we kind of draw things back, we always talk about, like, during debates, you want to engage with the best position of the other person, right? So there's a difference between there's this like fallacy called like a straw man, which means that
like a straw man versus Steelman argument.
Yes, right. So like a straw man, the reason why it came is because, like, a man like let's say a scarecrow made of straw, right, can be blown by the wind. So it's essentially saying it's the weak point, right? The weakest point, or it's not even a real point. You're just creating a straw man. People always say you create a straw man because that is essentially not the point that the person is actually presenting, but you're creating a point that's weak and you're knocking that point down. You're not actually engaging with the actual point that the person is trying to present, right? So that's one.
So to cut into Kedrick's I guess explanation there, no, I'll pass it back to you. So an example of a straw man argument is like global warming is real. Someone says global warming is real, and then someone comes up with a straw man argument and say, oh, so it's it's this X country's fault. Let's say America, because they're big powerhouse. Oh, it's America's fault because they're not they're not putting up policies, or they're essentially wasting all the money on politics and stuff like that. It's a completely different thing. It's like global warming is real, but you're blaming a country because like for like it's just it's not relatable at all. So that's like an example of a straw man. Would you say that?
To an extent, I guess it's also like that. It's also like a red herring. So red herring is another like fallacy in where you like red herring is essentially a fish. So it's apparently it smells really bad, and therefore you put that create something, and then you create something to divert the attention away, right? You create another point to divert the attention away, right? So it may be completely different, but I think a straw man is just like really, it's more like something that's tangentially related, but not actually. I can't think of anything on top of my head, but essentially you think of like the weakest opinion, the weakest opinion and the weakest point from the person.
You exploit the point. And you exploit it as much as you can.
But that is actually not the actual point. But on the flip side, you have the Steelman, which is the opposite, because obviously steel is like strong. It's the strongest point of the opposition, right, and you engage with that point, because the thing is that if you think your point is great, right, and then you should be able to engage with the best point someone presents you with. And I think that the ability to say, cool, let's engage with the best form of argument that the other side has to present, not only would be beneficial for
both parties, really.
Both parties, right? But it will be beneficial for the audience as well, because at the end of the day, what they're trying to persuade is to persuade the mind of the people that's watching the debate, right? I guess that is more on like a little bit more on the
like a formal debate setting.
Yeah, formal debate, or even people that it's a public, right? It's a public forum, right? Not so it's very different from like a private forum, right? I mean, most of the time,
or even just like a disagreement between friends. But yeah, go on.
Yeah, most of the time in private settings, people don't really like think about like, oh, what's the strongest point this person can engage with, because like I guess in a very private setting, if people do argue, usually it's quite irrational and very emotionally driven. So at the end of the day, they want to like get it settled. So most of the time, especially within like people in relationship, partners, siblings, all of that, right? That kind of disagreement is very different from public disagreement or public discourse where people are watching. And I also think that another thing that's important is something called like ad hominem. Ad hominem is like you attack the person instead of the point. And I think that this is very this is quite pervasive, right? At the end of the day, they'll be like, you shouldn't trust this person because this person is dishonest, right? So it's like you're attacking the character of the person, or you start name calling this. It's like, oh, this guy's like this person. It's like this, right? Because he's like shouting like a monkey or something. So you start with the name calling, and a lot of that usually signifies when someone starts attacking the person's character or personality and not the point. At the end of the day, you know that I feel like the first person who performs a personal attack is the first person to actually lose. To actually lose, because you have nothing substantial, so you have to attack the other person's character. And that is when I think disagreement gets really, really nasty, in the sense that now I don't have to feel that I'm being attacked. Already, most people in today's like climate, when someone disagree with what I believe or my point, I already feel, quote unquote, feel that that person's attacking me. But at the end of the day, we cannot measure someone's intent, or we cannot verify that intent, because what you feel might not be what actually is. But
there's a really great quote, right? Like you'll never know what people truly are intending until they actually say it.
Yeah. But then when you have someone who is performing an ad hominem attack,
and they say it,
yeah, now you can 100% verify that this person is really attacking my character. And so that is when I think things get really, really nasty. So, usually like even in like the fitness industry, I mean, both of us are like fitness professionals, right? So there's a lot of like sort of ongoing debate / discourse, low carbohydrate, right? All of that. At the end of the day, like, I think that if we approach topics such as, oh, cool, low carbohydrate versus not low carbohydrate, right, moderate to high carbohydrate, what's the purpose of it, right? And if the purpose is to say, cool, we want to see which is better for fat loss, right? And then you can kind of be on the same side, saying we are trying to find what is better for fat loss. We are not trying to say, cool, if
which is superior to the other.
Yeah. I am saying that high carbohydrate is better than low carbohydrate. Therefore, because this point is mine, I am better than you. We are not trying to do that. We're not trying to attach ourselves with that point, and actually say that if I manage to defend my point, it proves that I am a better person. So I think the ability, right? So besides like the first point that we talked about, where we kind of have to establish the foundation that both people are on the same side, or trying to seek truth together, right? The second thing that's very important is the ability to detach oneself from the point that they are trying to present. I think that's also really important. But nowadays it's quite hard to.
It's quite hard, yeah. And I think it's interesting because we're obviously, for those who probably aren't aware, most of you are, obviously Kedrick is pursuing his PhD. So, and I obviously graduated with in like a science background as well. So, we're sort of like looking at this with a very sort of like a very scientific lens in the case of like, if we ever get into an I guess whatever disagreement, argument, whatever we call it, our intent isn't necessarily to from this lens isn't necessarily to attack. It's literally just to like find out what is the best solution for the problem at hand.
Yep.
But I'm going to really throw a wrench into the works here and actually pick up on something Kedrick actually said, which is quite interesting, where when we start name calling someone, we know that that individual, might not be me, but that individual has lost the disagreement. And when Kedrick said that, the first thing that came to mind, ironically, the first thing that came to mind is let's call it a shouting match or an argument between a young child who wants to go to a birthday party, whatever, and their parent. And in most cases, and this is where experience comes into play, of course, if you've ever like reflect back on an argument you had with your parents when you're much younger, or you might have seen some TV shows or whatever it might be, you'll always end up seeing like, you always think like, why the child will always go, oh, mom or dad, you're bad because I don't like you, you're evil, whatever, like. And what Kendrick said there is actually quite true, because like in the end of the day, like, and this is where experience comes into play. It's like the child doesn't necessarily have the experience to argue, I guess that's the right word, his point of why is it more important for him to go to his birthday party than not. And the parent being whatever 20 years older, let's just use that, probably has already like 20 years of experience, more than the child, to understand that, hey, this birthday party isn't for you. So I thought that was quite interesting. And I think that if you ever had this more, I guess like this was sort of diving into the realm of like more personal disagreements, and it's a very personal thing. I think one thing that will really help, and I would like to assume most of you listening are above 18. I would like to think. If you're younger than 18, I don't mind, but at least having some sense of like self-awareness is, if you ever do end up in this position of like arguing or getting into a disagreement for personal gain, I think it is very important, using the example I just used, is like, okay, can you see it from the other person's point of view? So we basically transitioned here, kind of. It was a very, very like hard segue, but we got there from like a scientific sort of like debate into like, okay, we're going to sort of have this disagreement from a very personal point of view. And using that example as a child versus an adult, the adult will always win because the child can't see it from the adult's point of view. But as you, dear listener, or whatever, I think it is very, very important to develop good relationships, actually, to put yourself in someone else's shoes, especially when you're in an argument. Because like Kedrick said at the start, the worst thing in an argument or disagreement is that it can potentially ruin relationships, which is probably not what most people would want, right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, obviously there are people out there that would use disagreement to intentionally ruin relationships.
Yes, of course. There's always that person.
Yeah. So we other than that, we will say that like at the end of the day, we kind of figure what is I mean, another like good example, this could be a good example or bad example depending how you look at it, would be politicians, right? So bad example would be bad politicians who basically just start name calling and all that. But at the end of the day, politicians are called politicians because they talk about policies and which policies are better. They might have a different idea on what would work, right? But the end goal, or let's just say, should always be, how can I make this country better? Or how can I make society better? And then if you break it down to a small, but how can I make my community better? And then how can I make, bring it back to a more personal level, is how can I make this thing that I'm directly engaging with better, right? So this is like from a macro perspective where the country as a whole is so huge, then you bring it down,
so
right? And then
micro and
then like, cool, how can I make my family better, right? When you argue, like people argue with your parents, argue with your friends, or if you in school, you'd be like, oh, how can I make my classroom better? If you're arguing with your friend on like who should do, like why we should mop the floor 5 times versus why we should mop the floor 2 times, something like that, So if people disagree on stuff, you can kind of have to look at the angle first. What am I disagreeing about? What is the action, right, at the end that underlies this disagreement? Am I trying to actually achieve something, and are we trying to achieve the same thing? Because if you're not trying to achieve the same thing, there's actually no point. You're basically disagreeing on something that's completely different, right?
Exactly.
If I'm saying that, cool, it's a, let's just say, for example, it's a 32-inch screen, like better than a 60-inch screen, right? Then I'll be like, cool, what is it for, right? If you want to put a TV in the living room, right, surely you want to like put there, cool, a 60-inch screen is better. But if you are talking about a personal workspace, you're not going to put a 60-inch like TV to attach it to your work computer, right? So you have to kind of say, cool, the end goal is we are deciding is which screen is better for the living room, right? Then we can say, cool, and then you can then hash out why you think it's better and what are the methods to evaluate that you use to evaluate why you think your option or your point is better than the other person. So once you can be on the same page, because most of the time, I mean, if we look at like philosophy in general, people always define terms. I think it's very important to define terms first to ensure that you're actually talking about the same thing. And it's actually quite strange because people are really like averse towards disagreement, but like people who study philosophy or like philosophers, they go in knowing that people will disagree with them. Like that's the default. Like philosophy is a field where everybody has disagreements. By default, it's like you can because philosophy is not empirical science. You can't actually test it through the scientific method, right?
It's more of like your I think I can't remember who said this, but it's like I think it might be Tim Ferriss, I believe. It's like philosophy is the operating system of your mind, kind of. Something along those lines.
So yeah, it's not like testable, right? So at least it's not testable with the scientific method, at least. And you can, therefore, like the disagreement can be quite varied and from different aspects, So I do think that defining what you're disagreeing with and talking about the same thing, that's like really, really important.
And that's the danger of, I guess, like when we kind of look on like political disagreements or let's just throw it out there, whatever, fuck it, like vaccinations, are you do you support it or do you not support it? Because like what can happen is that when we get into disagreements, if there isn't a goal or even like a direction that you want to head into, what can really, really go very, very bad, and I've seen this, is that person A will argue their point and person B will argue their point, but it's not getting to the same like goal. They start to argue 2 different points, and then it's like, oh, you're saying that I should get vaccinated because of this, the government controls me, and then the other side, it's like, oh no, you shouldn't get vaccinated because it's freedom. It's like, and it's like I shouldn't get vaccinated because freedom of choice. But then like the vaccination one's like, oh, I should get vaccinated because it keeps my kids safe. It's like it's 2 completely different things. Like one's keeping my family safe and one is freedom of speech. It's like, like, and you start getting these really, really weird like situations, and that's just one example of like how, if you don't set the intention at least, or if both individuals of the groups aren't on the same idea of like, okay, we're going to talk about this, it can go really, really bad, as we have probably seen in the last year.
Yeah, I guess like you said, at the end of the day, and that often happens in a more like direct setting. I think the biggest example would be just like partners or spouses like arguing one another, and then at the end of that, what are we even arguing about again? Like, we're not
classic,
like
classic case.
Yeah, you just go to a point where you're not even talking about the same thing. You're just like shouting, and the fact that you're only hearing your own voice sometimes, and you completely lose sight of what you're trying to achieve, right?
100%.
I think that that's also like really important. The objective of disagreement must be there, and or at least the outcome of what you're trying to achieve, if when you disagree with someone, should always be at the back of your head. Are you trying to persuade someone that your point is better than the other? That's definitely that's one thing. Are you trying to one, disagree, and maybe together you all can find some, you can find truth together? That could be something. Or if you're trying to just like disregard the other person and belittle the other person, that could be another way, another underlying motivation on why someone would disagree with someone. So there could be a lot of like underlying motivations on why someone would disagree, and until both parties have the same underlying motivation, it's quite hard to be productive. So to ensure that disagreement is productive, they have to agree on something first, and that is like we are agreeing on heading towards we are headed towards the same place, or we are headed towards the same, we have the same idea of the direction this discussion should take. So that is kind of like, you kind of have to agree on something first before you can kind of like start disagreeing on stuff. So I think that when it comes to today's like culture as well, I mean the climate, right, or the climate and the conversations that happen in this social climate, a lot of, and obviously with the rise of social media, people don't really know how to have like quality disagreements and discussions, because when it comes to social media, you have the function of like being in your echo chamber. You see what you want to see. You can, if you disagree with somebody, you can block them, you can delete comment, or you can just, cool, I see a post that I don't agree with, right? And then I will just type a long angry message in the comment, right? And then I disable the notification. So whenever anybody else replies to me, I don't get notified and I don't see it ever. It's just me ranting into the open, and then I'll never ever go back with to look at that. So you can kind of, it is basically in a way where you have like a disagreement without any strings attached, and you no longer engage with that. So people feel like they can say anything, right?
And they'll use the whole term of like, I'm not disagreeing, I'm just using my right of freedom of speech. And it's like, yeah, but it's a fine line when you start using sort of like, when you kind of go down that route. It's like, well, if you obviously posted a long ass comment that you disagree with someone and it comes off very hostile, I think it's, for humans at least, I don't know, extraterrestrials, they might think differently. But I think it's important, like if you post a long ass comment, if you're talking and if you use the word of freedom of speech, then I think it is important for the OP or original poster, whoever you're vetting to, has the right to respond to you.
Yeah, because I think if you exercise freedom of speech, right, it goes both ways for the other person
exactly
as well. It is quite it is quite interesting, because some people would uphold certain standard for themselves but not for other people, right? So so I think that's also something to consider. And the biggest thing for me, at least when it comes to disagreement, is essentially trying to be charitable. You can't really measure intent, and I think that to kind of actually measure someone's intent without the person outrightly saying it or displaying it via actions, you need a lot of underlying assumptions, and the more assumptions you have, the more likely you may be wrong. So it is. So I think that when you already have this whole bunch of assumptions going into the conversation with someone, you are likely not to engage the person or the person's points, but you're trying to engage all these assumptions that you've created, and in a way you're just like trying to fight like shadows.
As one of I think I posted a question on Instagram, say we're doing this thing, and I posted a question on my Instagram, my personal Instagram, and said like, oh, what do you do if you disagree with someone? And I'm not going to name names, but you know who you are if you're listening to this. Awesome. He basically said like, oh, if I disagree with someone, I'm just gonna put my fist up. And it's like, yeah, it's obviously a funny comment, but I think
Yeah.
it's also really like true if you actually just retrospectively like look at it, right? Like if you disagree with someone, you are going to be in this very defensive position. And I think if you are going to like I guess we went down that tangent of like freedom of speech. If you are going to sort of exercise that right, then I don't think you should be in a position to sort of be too defensive about your opinions, but just go, okay, cool. Like this person has this frame of mind or this view of life. I have my views. That doesn't necessarily make that doesn't give me the right to be a bad human and just attack. We're different, which is cool. We can still live together, but I'm not going to obliterate you.
Yeah. It is a thing as well when you kind of like look at it from the point of what I said, what you're trying to achieve. I think that it really boils down to that, because if you disagree, if someone disagrees with you and you feel that you're upset, right? I think that point you should really kind of reflect and ask yourself, why am I upset?
Yeah.
Right? What is causing me to be upset? Right? It is this particular thing so important? I'm not saying that it's not important, but is it like really that important that I should get upset over this person who probably doesn't know me and it's just some random comment on social media, for example, disagreeing with me? Like that assumption, that belief that you hold would often tell you a lot about yourself if you would actually take time to think, right? Even though you may not come up with a rebuttal that is sufficient to defend yourself, you may think, oh wow, right? I've really not thought about this in such a manner, right? Why am I getting upset, right? Is my upset justified, right? Or am I just overreacting? Because a lot of times there, people can have very big overreactions certain times, and it is the bigger, I guess something that is like really not questioned or reflected. People tend to have this like big reaction, because I think if you have this conversation in your head with some, like for example, like why do I think that carbohydrates are better for most people, right? I'll be like, cool, my bias is like I definitely like carbohydrates, so that's one, I know that, right? But am I gonna say that because I like carbohydrates, therefore it's better for you? Yeah, no, that's not probably going to be a good point to convince someone, right? That you kind of look at all these reasons why I think carbohydrates are bad, and the thing is that when you start questioning that particular belief that you have, you kind of think about like the potential disagreements that surrounds it. And when someone actually disagrees with you, you'll be like, cool, I've actually heard that before, I thought about it, so yeah, it's fine, I don't really get upset. I think that person might be wrong, but if the person wants to discuss and is open to listening my point of view, we can have a conversation. But if not, I can just leave it as it is. But if you actually never actually thought about the potential oppositions to your current belief, you'd be like, oh man, like why is this person attacking me? I need to attack back, right? Because I've actually like never heard it before. For example, if you are you go to the jungle, right? And let's just say you see an animal that you've never seen before, right? You'll be like, cool, this animal is gonna attack me, because I assume everything in the let's just say I'm in Australia, okay? Because
everything in Australia wants to attack you.
Yeah, everything in Australia wants to kill me. But for example, like you've never seen this before, and like, man, this animal is actually a herbivore and doesn't eat meat, and it just looks fierce, right? And then, but if you actually thought about it, could that be a potential? And then you'd be like, okay, cool, right? It's probably fine, and you just like walk past it without actually thinking, going on the defensive or trying to attack it and kill it first before it kills you. So I think that when you start giving it thought, it's not only beneficial in terms of trying to find out whether the person is right or wrong, but it also benefits you as a person to think about why you're holding these beliefs so strongly. And I think that that's very, very important. So you always kind of have to be charitable, because if you are trying to think that the other person is trying to attack you, you are definitely going to attack back or go on the defensive. And at that point, you kind of disregard the whole purpose is to say, cool, let's try to, because at that moment, you're no longer on the same team. You're no longer on the quest to find truth together.
100%. Yep.
If that person is attacking you, I mean, it probably tells you're not on the same team, right? But if you're assuming that the person is, right, and you're not charitable then you are always going to be on your starting point is always going to be the person's not on my team. Therefore, I need to fight back. But if you can say, cool, this person thinks that this is better, and the person probably has a lot of background assumptions, right? Obviously, people being raised in
a certain way,
culture,
different
society
countries,
would affect that. But until you can say, cool, until you can admit that there's a whole lot of experience that this person has gone through, which is completely different from what you have, therefore this person adopts a view that's contrary to mine. Until you can say that, because by saying that itself, you need to think through all of that. You're gonna be say, cool, this person is my enemy. I gotta attack the person before this person kills me. So like it's always a war zone.
Yeah. I think to kind of summarize what Kedrick said there, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's you have a set point of views on your own, but be skeptical about your views as well. Like, and not in a bad way, like people say, oh, being a skeptic is good or bad, but it's like just be a bit skeptical, because it's kind of this argument, right? You're not going to be the only one who thinks like you, but there's also going to be people who don't think like you. So just being a bit skeptical with your thoughts, I think, is good, because then you start to sort of, I guess, not necessarily question your beliefs. I think your beliefs are very, very rooted in, very, very deeply rooted in. That's what I think. But I think it's like once you start to be skeptical about, or what are some things that, let's just throw it out there, right? Why is there a difference between Stoicism and Epicureanism? Like they're two kind of the same things, but they're very, very different philosophies, right? And I'm getting into Stoicism a lot more lately, but it's like there's the Stoics do talk like, oh, actually, the Epicureans have some things that should apply to my philosophy as well. And so being skeptical will then, I guess, allow you to look at your own thought processes, your own beliefs, and say, okay, this is the set of principles that I live by. But if something or someone who is different to me, who's completely opposing to my way of life, comes to me, I'm not, I then am able to be skeptical and say, okay, like, do I, like Kedrick said, do I attack, or am I going to be skeptical about it as well and say, actually, you know what, they're kind of different, but they don't pose a threat. And they, that's something to consider. Yeah, I think that's I think we have some Instagram questions, Kedrick, that we might potentially want to bring up. I know that this is obviously a very, very interesting topic that most people will have their own views, whether you're left, right. I don't really care. It's like just having an open conversation, really. But what are some questions that we can go through?
Right. So I guess the format of the questions we can go through is quite simple. I'm just gonna present like a question, right? And then we can go agree or disagree and why. And we try to keep it like short.
Yeah.
We can, and you don't have to agree with my point, and I don't have to agree with yours. We just go with our instinct, right? And I think that I hope that the listeners out there who have listened to this point would kind of understand our background, where we're coming from. We're trying to facilitate conversation. And if you disagree with anything that we say, because obviously right now as we answer these questions, we are not trying to say our position is infallible and it is 100% right. This is the only position to hold.
This is literally like giving you a life example of like, this is my point of view. I'm not going to be upset with what Kedrick says. And hopefully Kedrick's not going to be upset with what I say. And hopefully our listeners aren't going to be siding one or the other, or maybe continue listening. Maybe. Yeah. Even if you disagree.
And if you disagree with any of the points, or let's just say Chung and I have like different points, and you feel like you want to engage with either of the points that either of us has said, feel free to message us.
Feel free to message us.
And all that. So and I guess that's the whole purpose anyway, right? It's just like an experiment. Hopefully everything we've said has brought you to a place where be like, cool, right? If I disagree, how should I approach a
disagreement?
Yeah.
There you go.
Right. So I guess I can ask I'll ask the first questions first. The first question, since you brought it up just now, would be the question literally is like taking the vaccines. So I assume the vaccines is for COVID-19 and not any other vaccines.
Yep.
And I guess because it's not really a question, right? They ask what I asked what disagreements they have faced before. So I guess if I would phrase it in a question, it would be, should everybody take the vaccines? Yeah.
For me, yes.
And do you want to add a why or no?
I'll add a why.
Yeah,
so
just like edit like a short why.
So this is my why, and it might be very different to a lot of people's whys. I haven't seen my parents for a long time. And if the only way I'm able to fly over and see them is to provide a vaccination passport or whatever it might be, so be it. I think, people might argue with me and saying, oh, but freedom of choice. Yes, but I love my parents. And I think I'm able to give up that freedom to see them. That's my reason as to, I say, yeah, everyone should get vaccinated so I can go home and see them for a bit.
Yeah, I guess for me, I would say for most people, yes. And I would say, and the reason why is I think most people, at least the people who are currently qualified, right, who are like 18 and above, right, the benefits outweigh the risks. And but I would say the people that probably don't need the vaccine, or at least not the full dose that's currently recommended, would be kids and people who already have had COVID before, right? Because they have some form of natural immunity. That's what I would say.
Makes sense.
Next question. This is a little bit more on the lighter side. Anime equals cartoons. So I think people disagree whether like
hell no. Hell no. Animes are not cartoons. I probably don't. Should I even say, like, I mean, no, they're not. Cartoons are cartoons, and anime is. All right, I will admit I'm not a big like anime advocate, but I will know an anime when I see one. In my mind, it's like the style of animation, the way it's being presented. There's certain themes of anime that will always stay true to what an anime is, and a cartoon will, in my mind, it's just very different.
Yep, cool. I would say that all animes are cartoons, but not all cartoons are animes, right?
Nice.
So that's what I would say.
Yep. I could see that. Yep.
Okay, the next one is kind of like a little bit more we going to a little bit more on the fitness side. The first thing is knowledge is more important than experience when it comes to coaching.
Agree or disagree? For the purpose of not being I think both are important and play neutral, I would say experience is probably going to be more important, because you can learn through experience. Like if you make a mistake, and you're probably sane enough to make mistakes, like you probably have human logic to make sure like you're not going to break someone. So I think experience trumps knowledge. Because I feel like you have all the knowledge, but if you don't know how to use your wisdom and knowledge, then it doesn't really go anywhere.
Yep, I agree with you, because I think that that this question assumes that experience cannot count as knowledge. I think experience can count as knowledge. So
you learn.
I agree with you.
You learn.
Experience does. If I had to pick one, I'll pick experience.
Yeah. Like I said, if I had to pick one.
Yeah. Also because coaching is an applied field. So yeah. Next one would be powerlifting is a sport.
Hey, I'm proud. I would say it's a sport. My argument, because it's like I sweat, my heart rate goes up. And if you can consider esport as a sport, surely powerlifting is a sport. Surely.
Yeah. I would say the same. I guess I agree. Powerlifting is a sport because I do think that you exert effort, right? You exert physical effort, right? I think physical effort should
What
be.
is the definition of a sport anyway?
Yeah, I have no idea, but yeah, you exert physical effort, and through exerting physical effort in the right way, you can improve. So I think that to me at least suffice would suffice as a sport. So
and just to let people know, Kedrick hit the mark on what the definition of a sport is. So it involves physical exertion and skill, which an individual or team compete against another or others for entertainment. So it is a sport after all.
Yeah. Next one would be also related to powerlifting. Powerlifting federation doesn't really matter. So I guess for those who don't really know out there, as Chung thinks of his answer, I'll say there are different federations out there. You have drug tested versus non-drug tested, and different federations have slightly more stringent or lax rules when it comes to executing the lifts well. Yeah.
So does it matter? I personally would say no. However, it would matter in the context of whether you're competing as a drug-free athlete or a non-drug-free athlete. So I guess an example would be something like USPA, where there's drug tested and untested. In that instance, I will be fine. I don't think it really matters too much. But then in the context of whether you compete with the pool of drug tested or non-drug tested, then that's, I would say, we need to distinguish that.
Yep, I would say the same thing. It matters because certain rules have certain federations have different rules, and if you compete in that federation, you adhere to the rules, and certain rules might not apply to other federations. Last powerlifting question before we go into a little bit more spicy questions. Bench arch, cheating or not? Bench arch is cheating. Agree or disagree?
So is this in the context of powerlifting though?
That's powerlifting. Yeah.
So I say it's not cheating in the context of powerlifting, because in sport you will do your best to gain the most advantage within the rules. That's sport. Agree or disagree, that's sport. That's why you've got tall basketball players playing center, and you've got the shorter ones playing point guards. That's okay.
Yeah. And I hold the same view, because to say that it's cheating implies that there is a rule to follow, because you can't cheat if there's no rule, and if the rule is there, you follow the rules, and so if the rule says you can.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so that's all for the powerlifting topics. Now it's a little bit. There's only 2 questions that are this a little bit spicy, so letting all the listeners out there know.
No.
So the first one is gender is a social construct. Agree or disagree?
Woo! Gender is a social construct. Ooh. I have to ponder on this one. Have you thought of your answer, Kedrick?
Right, I'll give mine first, because obviously I received the question, so I have some time to think about it. All right, so it's a little bit
it's good though, because it really makes me not overthink it, which is a good thing.
So I think that if we define gender as gender roles and gender stereotypes, and how men and women should be, those are social construct. But if you're talking about gender using gender synonymously with biological sex, then I say no. In that case, it is not. So it depends what people are referring to when they say gender, because terms can be used. People use terms interchangeably, which is why I think that it's important to define terms.
So I will probably take the question at face value, and again, by the way, I'm very supportive of whatever, but I'll take the question at face value. Is gender a social construct? Yeah, because is gender a social construct? As Kedrick has pointed out, yes, because that it actually is. But if we start talking biological, then obviously that's point of contention there.
Cool. Last one. I guess it's a good one to kind of end on, because it is relating to ultimate reality. God doesn't exist. Agree or disagree?
Ooh. My dad will say it doesn't. My mom says they're multiple. And they're still married. What do you know? After so long. So for me, I think God does exist. I think that there are definitely things outside of what Homo sapiens will be able to achieve. An example I always like to use is like the Big Bang. Right? We know that the Big Bang happens, boom, universe happens. But one might argue that the Big Bang happened by chance.
Yep.
So then my question to them is, okay, if there isn't something out there and the Big Bang just happened by chance, what do you define as by chance? What is a chance? What's probability? You know. So that would be my answer, and went a bit of a tangent there.
Yep. If God doesn't, okay, basically they say God doesn't exist. So to answer the question whether I agree or disagree, I would say I disagree, which means that I hold the affirmative that God does exist.
Yeah.
And
same.
Yeah, so if you ask me why, I think that there is good evidence of, at least to some people, that the evidence, and for myself, the evidence out there persuades me enough to think that God does exist. And if you want to talk about what specific God, blah blah blah, right? That's a whole other.
Yeah, that's all.
That's a whole.
By the way,
conversation.
if you're listening to this and you are someone who's religious, please get in touch, because I'm trying to sort of like just put it out there, like trying to get a round table of like different religions and just come together and talk. Like I said, this podcast is to facilitate conversation. You know, and I think it's cool if we are able to do that. So just throwing it out there.
Yeah, at the end of the day, like I said, this whole podcast is to facilitate a conversation. And yeah, I guess we don't really have to ask the guests.
Well, I'll ask Kedrick this then. If we take it back to square one, what is the best way to engage in what is the best way to approach a disagreement? What's the best way to approach a disagreement?
One is always be charitable. Do not question. The first step is to never question and assume the person's intent. Second is to always ensure that you are talking about the same thing or trying to achieve a similar goal. So I said that would be my answer on how to productively disagree with someone.
Wonderful. Well, hopefully, if you guys stayed till the end, well, we appreciate it. If you enjoy this format of more philosophical and sort of like all these weirdy conversations, please let us know. We love to do more of these ones. And if you enjoyed it, like, share, subscribe. I don't know if you can give a rating. I'm sure you can on iTunes, I believe. And yeah, we will. Thanks again, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
Right. See you all next time.